abolition of freedom activity who never wrote anything, who never were interviewed about anyone. They spoke with their feet. They just did it. So even though the 1800s is the peak period of abolitionist movement, all kinds of stuff politically, understand from the minute someone first got here, the freedom ethos was in them, and they were getting their freedom. You guys get me? So the notion of someone like Gabriel and Araminta, who spoke with their feet, they did their thing. And then there are people who speak with their pen. People who speak with their pen. And so when we think about this issue of abolition of this institution, we begin to think about writers. And writers have been some of the most important people in this movement. Whether they were writing from a theological standpoint and trying to urge people as their Christian duty, whether they were debating literally this thing amongst students, as you'll see tomorrow at this place called Lane Seminary, or where they were penning poetry or extended pieces of fiction to try to dramatize the event. So when we think about this, I want to start with a woman. Her name was Lucy Terry, okay? It's 1774, Lucy Terry. She's the first person of African descent ever published as a writer in America, okay? Lucy Terry. She only writes one poem. It's called Bar's Fight, which really was about a fight that she witnessed, but the notion of writing your story or writing your way into history. The next person is very important, and her name is Phyllis Wheatley. Wheatley. Phyllis Wheatley. If you're in the South, you'll always see high schools named after Phyllis Wheatley. You'll see elementary schools named after Phyllis Wheatley. She is the first African-American poet ever to publish an extended piece of fiction, meaning she actually published an anthology of poems, and this was late 1700s. Now, she was a very interesting person because she was brought from Africa at 8 years old, brought to America, and the person that owned her actually taught her how to read and write. She then wrote a number of letters to important people in the Massachusetts and New England area in the late 1700s, which piqued everyone's interest, like who is this person writing, where did she come from, because they were dealing with two issues. One, the notion that they were saying that people of African descent didn't have the intellectual capacity to do something, and them saying that women did not have the intellectual capacity to do certain things. So the fact that she was an African American and a woman means that people were questioning even the fact that she could write T-H-E. So when you look at a copy, and I think Hardy's finally got one of these original copies of her first anthology of poetry, the crazy thing that you see is you don't start with this letter from the editor or from the publishing house about this great piece of fiction, but you start off with 36 different letters from different white men who are attesting to the fact that they have examined her and can attest to the fact that she has written this stuff herself. Wow. One of the people is John Hancock. So this notion of just trying to get your words out because they're going to question not even the words, I mean the theme or the notions, but literally the ability for you to even do it, right? And so she's going to come along and she writes this, I'm going to give you a little piece of this poem that she writes, which is called On Being Brought from Africa to America. And it just goes like this, pretty simple. She says, "'Twas mercy brought me from my pagan land, taught my benighted soul to understand that there's a God, that there's a Savior too, once I, redemption, neither sought nor knew. Some view our sable race, meaning people of African descent, with a scornful eye. In quotes, their color is a diabolical dye. But remember, Christians, that Negroes, black as Cain, may be refined and join the angelic train." So she gives that piece, and she was very much a person who had she had read the Bible back, forth, and sideways. She was able to put her ideas out there. She ends up getting her freedom, but she's a very important, boom. She wrote, she spoke with her pen. The next person is an individual named Victor Saysjour. Victor Saysjour, S-E-J-O-U-R. And Victor Saysjour is a kind of francophone writer, okay? So he grows up in New Orleans, Louisiana. His parents had been people who had left and fled after the Haitian Revolution, had fled Haiti. He comes to that space, and he was what we call an FPC, a free person of color. Okay? FPC, free person of color. He gets involved with a group of writers in New Orleans in the early 1800s, specifically around 1817, and he writes a short story called The Mulatto, or La Mulatra, is what it's called in the original thing. And this is this crazy story. about a dude whose father had been the person who owned him, who then tries to make his way with his son's wife, in essence. Oh, and when she stands up to do something about it, to resist him, he then puts her in the gallows and hangs her. And then the main character, he knows that this has been his father. He doesn't know this is his father, but this person, he then vows that he's going to get revenge. And he goes off and lives with a group of Maroons. You guys know what Maroons are? Maroons are, so in many places where people of African descent were enslaved, there were also these things called maroonage or maroon communities. In essence, especially in Florida, places where they could go and hide out and create whole communities without the other person trying to find them. They would be big time in the mountains of Jamaica, in the mountains of Haiti. In Brazil, this the biggest one is called Palmeiras, which is almost 20,000 people right outside of Salvador de Bahia. And in this case, this guy goes and lives amongst the people, you know what I mean? The Africans, if you get where I'm coming from. And then at the end is going to come back and kind of wreak havoc on his former owner, who is also his father. I won't give you the rest of it, but it's one of the greatest short stories. It's melodramatic. It has all this stuff. It's like this great sword fight. It's all these other things. But that thing was not even recognized as a piece of African-American fiction until the mid-1980s, because it was originally published in French and circulated in France. So when people were looking for an American writer, they didn't actually know it was. And it was the work of a guy, Henry Louis Gates, Skip Gates, who actually was doing this kind of historical literature stuff and then realized that that was it. What I'm trying to say is that even in their first pieces of fiction, what are they writing about? Freedom. And in this case, the mulatto, this guy is biracial and he still wants to kill his owner. You get me? Okay? And then we get to 1844. And we got another piece that's dropped in there. And that piece is called...
Oh, let me use your mic.
Yes.
So Frederick Bailey escapes from slavery at the age of 20 in 1831. By the age of 22, 23, he's a paid lecturer for the Massachusetts Anti-Slavery Society, which was led by William Lloyd Garrison, the white abolitionist. And Douglas's job, he had changed his name after escaping to Douglas. His job was to go from city to city, town to town, just telling his story. They just said, narrate your story. And so he would do that, and then he would start to have a problem. People started to doubt that he had ever been enslaved. They couldn't wrap their minds around what they thought an enslaved person looked and sounded like, what they were seeing, this well-dressed, eloquent, charismatic, theatrical, funny man. So in order to prove he was who he claimed to be, he wrote his first autobiography, Narrative of the Life of Frederick Douglass, an American Slave, which was published in 1845 in May. And on the cover of that book, for those of you that have read it, you'll see something very important. It says, written by himself, which speaks exactly to what Dr. Walker has been talking about. And even so, written by himself, he had to have William Lloyd Garrison write an introduction, Wendell Phillips write a letter in there, just to validate that this was something that he actually wrote. The book gets published, and then he has another problem. It becomes a bestseller. That's the last thing that you want, is the notoriety of a best-selling book if you're trying to hide from your enslaver. But that's what happened, because it made him a household name, a celebrity. And he would have to flee to Europe for a couple of years as kind of a cooling off period. And as we move along through his story, I'll start to fill in the other pieces with that.
So once again, they speak with their pen. And then I want to throw another piece out there. It's 1849. And a book comes out in America. It's originally published in Canada, but then it comes out in America. And it's called The Life of Josiah Henson. The Life of Josiah Henson. I want to uplift that name, Josiah Henson. Josiah Henson. Henson. And in this was an individual who had been enslaved in Maryland, who had then gotten his freedom, went up to Canada and created a whole autonomous black community called the Dawn Settlement, and even had visited and met with Queen Victoria. Okay? So this was this amazing African American who had been, once again, on a plantation. He had told a story about what happened, everything about it. He put that out there. And I just want to put this over here, but his name is Josiah Henson. Boom. And then in 1854, I want to say, another book is going to come out. And this book will change everything for American history and for the history of literature, all that stuff. The book is called Uncle Tom's Cabin. Okay? It's called Uncle Tom's Cabin. It's written by a woman named Harriette Beecher Stowe. And Harriette Beecher Stowe is a part of an abolitionist family. Her dad, Lyman Beecher, is one of the most important people in this whole issue of abolitionism and also early kind of what I call social justice religion stuff. The notion of that God may not just be here for the rich, but he may be here on the path of the oppressed, right? So her dad is Lyman Beecher. Actually, tomorrow we're going to go to this place called Lane Seminary. We're going to call it the Harriette Beecher Stowe House, but it was actually Lane Seminary where her dad was the president of the space. But when she was younger, one of her cousins had said, I want to take you to a place called Maysville. And they come to Maysville. She stays out here for a little while. And she says, one day, I want you to see something. And what she saw was an auction of people. And it happened right here where we're standing. Okay, this is the space and place where Harriette Beecher Stowe saw that auction that changed her life. Her dad was already an abolitionist. You guys get where I'm coming from? She had already been inculcated in most of the stuff. But it's another thing when you see, touch it, feel it. Then when you have it conceptually out there. And remember, we were in Cincinnati. Lane Seminary is in Cincinnati. So she comes, she sees this, and everything about her says, I got to do something. I have to do something. I have to do something. And remember I told you about Phyllis Wheatley had a problem being a woman writer? Because people, you guys, even white women, this was an issue. Like, did you do it? How did you learn? Because we don't have compulsory public education in America till the 1920s. So most people, if they did educate somebody, they educated their son and not their daughter. She's lucky because she happens to be in a house of a person who's the president of a university, and so learning is everywhere, but she's got to figure out what she's going to do. And so she takes the heart experience that she had here, and she takes that book, The Life of Josiah Henson, and she takes a few other things that were going on, and she writes this story. It's called Uncle Tom's Cabin. That book will be one of the most important books ever written in American history, because it will humanize the institution of slavery for many people who never saw it. Who never saw it. Who never, ever saw it. If I lived in Connecticut, I didn't see it. If I lived in Michigan, I didn't see it. I heard about it. I heard it was a bad thing, but it wasn't right in my doorstep. But then all of a sudden now I've got this novel, and this novel is going to allow me to get in there. And the main character, his name is Uncle Tom. Now, I'm going to say this, and I know we didn't do this before. So I have to say this before we go further, because so the name Uncle Tom for black people is the worst name you can call a black person. It's the most, Samuel L. Jackson, when he played in Uncle Tom in the movie Django, said, I got the opportunity to play the most repugnant figure in black history, which is an Uncle Tom. It means for us that you're a sellout, that you care about the others more than you care about us. That if we're planning to get our liberation, you're going to be the one that goes and tells the owner that we're doing it. This is the worst. There is nothing you can call a black person that's worse than that name. So I say this because it's a trigger when we start talking about Uncle Tom's Cabin, and I realize that many black people are like, I'm sorry, but it's hard for me to even get to where you're going, Doc, because the word Uncle Tom has already got me messed up. You know, I don't want nothing that has to do with no Uncle Tom's or anything like that. Now, in the book, Uncle Tom's Cabin, it is the issue that he is devout Christian that causes him to be in compliance. Like, he is doing things and putting up with stuff that his taskmaster Simon Legree are doing, not because he's just a boss, but because he's supposedly doing this for his own Christian benefit, that in essence there's a higher law, right? Now, in the book, the crazy thing is the individual will be that person. In the end, I mean, he does stuff like dives off the boat to save Eva, you know what I mean? And this is this notion of this black person, you know, risking his life to save the person who could be his oppressor. You guys get where I'm coming from? Even in the end, I mean, he takes his death kind of like in stride of this is my Christian duty. But then after that, there was all these what were called anti-Tom novels and anti-Tom theater pieces that occurred. So for the one Uncle Tom's Cabin book, there were about 35 other books written that were all like called Uncle Tom's Aunt, all the rest of these other things, which were pro-slavery pieces. Yeah. Also at the same time, the most important form of like popular culture and popular like consumption was this thing called blackface minstrelsy. Okay? Blackface minstrelsy. If you got your phone out, it's this notion of white people putting this black tar on their face, white lips, the glad hands, and going out there pretending to be black people, but pretending to be the most negative stereotypes that you could ever imagine. Lazy, slothful, no, all that kind of stuff. And this was American theater at the time. So at the time, this book comes out, and the pro-slavery people were like, how can we take away the power of this book, which becomes the most published, you know, read thing in the 19th century next to the Bible? Okay? So how do I counter that? Well, I counter it with my own popular culture narrative. And so that meant that all of a sudden these minstrel shows, which already had these terrible characters, had a new terrible character. And this guy was going to be Uncle Tom, and his job and all these minstrel shows that they would have would be the one who sold everybody out. That media portrayal ends up being the constant media portrayal of black people all the way till Talking Pictures. You know, the Jazz Man, one of the first like Talking Pictures, the guy's in blackface. You know, Al Jolson in blackface. And we get to the first television stuff, Amos and Andy, it's blackface. All right? So I understand when we say this issue about Uncle Tom, but I want you guys to separate the two. There's a person, Josiah Henson, who actually escaped from slavery, went to Canada, established an autonomous black community, came back and got 16 members of his own family. Y'all get where I'm coming from? And then went there. She didn't put that part in the book. Okay? So I'm just saying that because as we get to this discussion, I want to understand that there is a person of African descent who is pushing big time. And Hardy's got a copy of the keys to Uncle Tom's Cabin. We have it on the bus. And she lists the different sources that she had. So as we uplift Harriette Beecher Stowe, wants us to also understand this guy, Josiah Henson, because he's the real actual story behind the thing. Okay, everybody cool? All right, so Harriette Beecher Stowe, now influenced by her dad, this book she's read, the climate that's going on, the Fugitive Slave Act, you guys get where I'm coming from, everything is going on. Now she's got to do something. She writes this book that is going to be about this experience she has, and she's trying to humanize the folk so that they will be able to gain whatever courage it takes for them to step up and do the right thing, meaning push their representatives to end the institution of slavery, okay? All right, so what we're going to do here today is we're going to simulate an auction. Now, I want to start with this. Never, ever do this. Do you guys hear me? Never, Joseph, never do it. Never do it. Never do it, China. Never do it. Sonia, never do it. Never do it. Never do it. Don't go back to your school and say, I went on this Footsteps of Freedom and Dr. Walker told me to do this. No, don't ever do this. You will be the laughing stock of your school. You will be on the news the next day. They'll be having you on everything from Fox to CNN. All people will be on your butt, okay? So never, ever, 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 ever. Well, the kid said it was okay. It's not okay. Well, the parents said it was okay. What about the other students? No, just read about it, talk about it, but you do not have to do this. But we grown. And we're going to do this because we have to have a real discussion here more than just a perfunctory kind of superficial discussion. All right? So,
No video.
Yeah, no video on this, you guys. No video, no video.